good evening, everybody. You're welcome to this evening's webinar here, hosted in Teagasc Roscommon Longford division. This evening we have Damien Barrett, Senior Veterinary Inspector with the Department of Agriculture, and Damien's going to go through the current TB status in the region. He's going to do a presentation on it, and basically the regulations, controls, etc. And we also then, for the second half of it, we have Conor Geraghty. Conor is a veterinary surgeon here in Mount Bellew. He's with the FarmGate veterinary group, and Conor is going to go through the new veterinary medicine regulations there that came in December. So they'll be applicable for 2016, and Damien is going to go through the TB. So each speaker will be on for about 20 minutes and will hold questions until the end. My colleague here, John Kelly, he'll take in your questions. So the more interaction we get, the better. And we'll have two 25-minute presentations, and then we'll have 10-15 minutes at the end for questions. So I'm going to kick over here to Damien, and I'm going to let him start here. Okay, Damien?
Okay, everything's fine. Grant.
Yeah,
right. This is a graphic of where we are at the moment. Reactor numbers are around at the end of 2025 we're at 38,500. As of last week, that's come down a bit as well. I'm talking 12-month rolling averages here. The herd incidence has come down to 5.68, which is almost down from 6% last year. And now the only fly in the ointment here is that the confirmed slaughterhouse cases, that's continuing to rise. That's there are two views on that there may be disease going undetected, but also that it's taken a longer or it's taken a while for disease that's working in the system or to work its way out of the system. This is the trend over the last 6 months, where we've gone. The 12-month rolling average at the end of July was 42,500. It's gone down to 37, and the herd incidence was at 6.27, and that's now at 5.68. The herd incidence peaked at 6.5%. So as you said there, I wanted to give an idea of where Longford and Roscommon sit in the national picture. As you can see there, that the herd incidence in County Longford is slightly above the national average. It's improved significantly over the last 6 months. And in County Roscommon, the herd incidence is at 4%, and it's below the national average, and it's consistently around 4 for the last 6 months. I just decided thrown in here a few neighbouring counties and see what the picture there is like. Westmeath, it's improving, falling from just short of 9% to 7%, and Cavan is below the national average there, around 5%. Galway, just over 4%, and Leitrim is about 4.5%, and it's about 6 months ago, and it's come under 4% recently. This picture here tells us where the trends were nationally over the last 12 months. As you can see, for the last while, in quarter 4 2025, and probably starting in quarter 2 or quarter 3, there has been an improvement in herd incidence. Now, while things have improved, they really took off in 2024. And just in terms of where the reactor numbers were, the peak there in 2024 in the recent past at about 42,000. As I said, at the end of this year, they came in there 38,500. That's still way ahead of where it was. The first of those graphs is 2018, where they're around 17,000. So while things improved in 2025, they're still twice where they were in 2018. This is given a kind of an outline of the breakdown of reactors, the third type, and if anything, this has become more in 2025, 24, 25. This has become more stark in that in 2025, almost 70% of our reactors are coming from were dairy-bred animals, and the numbers in suckler herds was decreasing. That's probably a reflection of the demographics of the national herd. Drilling into this a bit more, I want you to go to the bottom line on this graph first, and this really is showing the level of TB and healthy slaughter cases per thousand slaughtered. And this is us measuring factory lesions. And you'll see there they've gone from 0.87 per thousand in 2019 to 1.62 in 2024. And that really showing that the factory lesions doubled in this time period. And we're using that as a barometer of the background level of TB in the system in the national cattle population. So what we can see from that is that the level of TB in the national herd has essentially doubled between 2019 and 2024. However, the detections in the disease didn't keep up with that. Certainly, I think the year of most concern to us was 2022. There was a rising trend there from 2020 or 2019 to 2020, but it kind of fell back in 2022, and that's a concern. So background levels of TB have been increasing between 13 and 14% year on year since 2019. Skin detection isn't keeping pace with this. Herd incidence actually fell in 2022, and the breakdown size has increased. Increased breakdown size is telling us that their cattle to cattle transmission has assumed a greater importance. Residual infection has uh, Residual infection has also assumed a greater importance, and there's a few things um, playing into this. The herds have got bigger as a result of milk quota abolition. There are more dairy herds, there are larger dairy herds, and there's been quite a bit of cattle movement to facilitate that increase in herd size. Our residual infection model in UCD has shown that long-term residency and herd size are the two most significant risk factors in the occurrence of cattle-to-cattle transmission. And this means that the role of breeding cows in particular has assumed a greater importance. These cows are around for the long haul, and there's an increased risk associated with those. This from COVID, you may remember that you probably all became familiar with the R0, and the R0 is the number that each infected animal or person will infect. Now, our understanding of the R0 up until recently was it was about 1.5. But this research from the UK has shown that the R0 can increase to 4.9 in a 400 animal herd. So that what that means is that one animal infects 5, infects 25, infects 125 until it runs out of animals to infect. This study also showed that 20% of herds are harboring infection at the time of de-restriction. And the reason for that is that the skin test, while it has a specificity second to none, it throws up about 1 in 5,000 false positives. There remains two out of it. When it's carried out to a very high standard, it leaves 2 out of every 10 infected cattle go undetected. Half of recurrent breakdowns were due to residual infection in this study, and half of those were due to the presence of just one animal. So this study really highlights the danger of leaving infection behind, because it'll go on and fester and give rise to more infection later. In We're dealing with TB in a two-host system for the most part. In certain parts of the country, deer may be playing a part, but for the most part, it's a two-host system involving cattle and badgers. And it's driven primarily by infection in cattle, which spills over into badgers and spills back. So, but the key thing to remember here is that the transmission with events within the species are far more common but within the species are far more common than events between them. What this means is that, for instance, in one particular study, the average number of cat-to-cat transmission events was 17 times greater than the number of badger-to-cattle transmission events. So the spread within cattle was 17 times greater than the spread between badgers and cattle. And that's worth bearing in mind. And that really accounts for why we're seeing substantially larger breakdowns. Um, this this is coming from that work in UCD where it's shown that herd size coupled with increased residency times were increasing the odds of a TB breakdown. There are three sources of infection. Be wildlife purchase, wildlife, as I said, primarily badgers. Purchased, this is where an animal purchased will fail the the next test. And the residual infection or the hidden burden of infection, this could be known as latent infection or allergic. Allergic are animals that fail to respond to the test. These are the sources. As I said, residual infection is assuming a greater importance. And really what I want to really highlight is that whatever way the disease is introduced to a herd, and we look at that as a fire lighter. If you're looking for the bigger breakdowns, what's giving rise to that is cattle to cattle transmission. So if the initial introduction is a fire lighter, cattle to cattle transmission is the petrol that goes on that fire and causes to spread exponentially. We commissioned the University of Wageningen in the Netherlands to carry out some modelling work for us on our wildlife. And the main question we asked them was that if we continue to do what we're doing in terms of our control program, in terms of testing and removing infected cattle and culling and vaccinating badgers, will we eradicate TB? And the answer to that was we won't. And then we asked them to model a couple of other interventions, which included um, badger vaccination, partial badger vaccination, full badger vaccination with selective culling, or partial badger vaccination with selective culling, and full badger vaccination with selective culling. We also asked them to model, or they modeled a couple of different trade scenarios, including risk-based trading, pre-movement testing, and an outright movement ban. And we also looked at a couple of other scenarios, including test and removal, improve farm biosecurity, and cattle vaccination. Now, improve farm biosecurity was essentially blocking the transmission of TB between badgers and cattle, and that was actually found to be very, very effective in one of the more effective interventions. And what that means in simple terms is raising water troughs, fencing offsets, making rising feed troughs, not feeding concentrates on the ground, those kind of things. All of those things were found to have quite a positive impact in reducing the spread of TB. So they modeled all these various scenarios, and getting back to the R0, bringing it beneath 1, that's there in the green, and that's the sweet spot in all of this. And if you look on each of these boxes on the bottom, it's listing the type of wildlife interventions, and then on the left hand side it's looking at the cattle interventions, so test and removal, improve biosecurity, as I said, blocking those transmission pathways, and ultimately cattle vaccination. I'll talk about cattle vaccination, why it's not on the cards just yet, maybe at the end. And then on the top we looked at various scenarios. On the left box there, the movement restriction, that's essentially what we have at the moment, and that's not going to bring the R0 less than 1. Risk-based trading and pre-movement, as you can see there, coupled with improved biosecurity and the wildlife, the selective culling and the vaccination, that can bring the R0 less than 1. And then the outright movement ban, that's included for academic purposes. That won't be happening. So will our current approach to TB or eradicate TB? The Chang paper, that Wageningen work, says no. And then we're dealing with the disease that's the epidemiology of it has changed since the demographics of the cattle population has changed, and residual infection has assumed a greater importance, and that is more challenging to address. So that prompted the development of the TB Action Plan, which the minister launched last September. It's a 5-point plan essentially with 30 actions. Now I'll go through those quickly here. The first of those is the first measure is supporting herds free of TB to remain free. The first thing here is the practical biosecurity, which I spoke about, and that's about simple, low-cost biosecurity measures which prevents TB spread. And this advice will be shared to farmers. There will be a package later in the year to, to financially support this, but this isn't. Most of these aren't expensive, like fencing offsets, raising troughs. Those things, generally speaking, are not expensive. Um, Breeding for resistance, um, we're working with the AI industry to increase the number of bulls with genetic resistance. In the absence of a cattle vaccine, genetic resistance is the next best thing to improve herd resistance and resilience. And we've seen over the last few years that the use of bulls with the low PTA for TB has increased substantially. We'll be introducing a 30-day pre-movement test for dairy cows before moving into a new herd, a new breeding herd, and contract reared heifers will be pre-movement tested before they go home. The in a scenario where there's several herds feeding into a contract rearing operation, they will be required to be pre-movement tested going in. The pre-movement option will be available. This was where someone could buy an animal that was out of the 6-month test and have it tested after. This this meant that potentially infected animals were moving, so that option has been removed. Informed cattle purchases, what this means is that people will be made aware if an animal, a breeding animal, or this will be females only, have been present in a high risk breakdown. So these will be breeding females 18 months or more, which will be identified at the point of sale if they were present in a H breakdown. A H breakdown is a breakdown with 3 or more standard reactors, and this will allow farmers, when they're choosing breeding replacements, to make informed decisions. The next thing is where we're about increased collaboration with our colleagues in DAERA, and this is for we have a shared island project on this, and there's quite a bit of communication, increased communication with our colleagues in DAERA in Northern Ireland. Um, there's quite a substantial amount of money going into TB research every year. That's actually increasing, and we're conducting a review of our TB eradication program to ensure consistency across the country. The next point here is reducing the impact of wildlife on the spread of TB, and what we're doing here is we're changing from blanket vaccination to test, vaccinate, or remove. Up until recently, all in vaccine areas, all badgers were vaccinated. Here, where we'll be testing the badgers, and those that are found to be positive for TB will be culled. In areas this in the next 2 points there about an agile, and just come back to me, that accounts for this when we look at the selective culling mentioned in the model from Van Gedingen. The next point there is the agile wildlife program and a localized response in vaccine areas. We have cull areas where we cull badgers only. In vaccine areas, we will, depending on the epidemiological situation, where there's a high incidence, we will be flexible in our approach to the wildlife program, and their culling may be brought back into those areas. A financial support package, as I said, administered through co-ops, will be made available to help farmers to put in place the mechanisms to block those transmission pathways. In terms of the deer management, we're involved in the deer management stakeholder group, and since we became involved with that, there's been the appointment of a national deer program manager and the establishment of 15 deer management units. There'll be also, most recently, a number of mobile larders have been purchased, and this is all about increasing the numbers of deer that will be culled to reduce the deer numbers. The next point here is the detection and elimination of TB infection as soon as possible, and to avoid a future breakdown. We're making gamma interferon blood testing mandatory in herds of 80 cows or more. where there's 5% of the exposed cohort or 10 animals, whichever is the lesser, is positive. And that's to ensure that we deal with residual infection in these bigger herds. Bigger herds are at greater risk of residual infection, and we need we need ancillary tests like the gamma interferon to along with the skin test to root out infection. The skin test on its own is not likely to be sufficient to root infection out of these herds. We're making available the herd test results for farmers, where we'll be providing the readings. And this is the reason for this is there's evidence from the UK in particular that animals that have bottom lumps that may pass the test uh, are at greater risk of failing a future test. So we want people to identify these animals and remove them before they cause trouble. Herds that have had repeated H breakdowns, these are so-called relapse herds. These are herds with three or more standard skin reactors on two subsequent occasions where it's the same cohort. There'll be cows that were present at the first breakdown become reactors at the second. These animals are moving on to a 3 year or these herds are moving on to a 3 year testing program at six monthly intervals after de-restriction. We're making a special effort to ensure that that testing is of a high standard, and this is through supervision and checks and that kind of thing. Um, we're encouraging farmers to improve all areas of biosecurity, and this will be provided through the TASER program, where the department will fund a TB advisory visit from carried out by the farmer's own private vet to provide advice specific to keeping the disease out of the farmer's farm. This is advice that's tailor-made for the management conditions of the farm involved. Risk mitigation plans will be in place for all herds and H breakdowns, so as to these are plans to avoid future breakdowns. And we're going to try and get ourselves involved more with knowledge transfer, like evenings like this, providing sharing knowledge with people. Um, in terms of the controlled finishing units, controlled finishing units are an important aspect of the industry, and they they're allowed to exist so long as that they adhere to specific biosecurity measures. If we're going to ensure that these measures are adhered to, um, um, and those that aren't adhering to them will be no longer controlled finishing units. Um, this this is predominantly in and around double fencing around grazing areas. Um, where there's associated herds, uh, we're going to ensure that where herds are associated, both herds will be restricted if one becomes restricted. And then the last thing is the reducing the impact of high risk animals and spreading TB. And the first issue there is probably the most controversial. In herds with 80 animals or more with major breakdowns, that's as we said there, at least in that instance, 5% of the herd or 10, whichever is the lesser, they will be restricted from moving animals to the the infected cohort. And if this applies just to the infected cohort, um, these animals won't be allowed onto the open market for 2 years after the removal of the last reactors. These animals can go direct to slaughter or control finishing unit, but they cannot go onto the open market. Animals that are not in this cohort, calves, weanlings, in-calf heifers, etc., are 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 free to move, but these animals that are part of the infected cohort, the cows, are not will not be allowed onto the open market. We're encouraging people to buy from herds of an equal or a better risk, TB risk category status, and we'll be encouraging people to ask those questions, to people to be aware of the issues involved, or of the risk involved. And the next point is we're looking at ways of supporting farmers from restricted herds to move calves to other herds. Um, we are aware that this being restricted at a particular time of year does cause additional hardship at a time of year when people are under pressure already. Um, in these instances, what we have at the moment, we're discussing, is putting a scenario in place where people have a pre-existing relationship with someone that they can continue to sell to those, but the buyer will have to have two clear tests they're essentially assuming the risk of the selling herd. We're also putting in place sales for restricted herds under strict biosecurity. Now, at the moment, these are happening online and facilitated through marts, so that these animals can go to control finishing units with the view to with the view to making sure there's competition in the market. So I think now I might have gone a bit over time there, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Damien. We'll take questions at the end. Thanks, Damien. We'll take questions at the end. We'll move on to Conor there, and we'll see if Conor, can you hear me? Yeah?
I can.
Yeah. We'll move on to Conor. And Conor is going to go through the new veterinary medicine regulations. So we'll hold off for questions at the end. There's a few in there, Damien, but we'll do them all together at the end. Okay, Conor?
Okay, can you see that now, James?
Yeah, I can see that, Conor. Yeah, go on ahead.
Perfect.
Go on ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I had a couple of slides put in about blue tongue at the start, and I didn't take them out, but I'll just run through them quickly. Now, Damien Barrett will be a lot more learned individual on blue tongue than I would, but basically just an overview, seeing as it's topical. It's a notifiable disease caused by blue tongue virus 3. It has spread throughout Europe and in the UK. It's spread by midges. Doesn't have any effect on human health or food safety. The morbidity can be quite high in certain cases, and mortality can be high and has been described as high, especially in sheep flocks, but that hasn't been the experience in the UK. So we have a positive herd in Wexford announced over the weekend, and I suppose the reality is there wasn't many midges working in Wexford or anywhere else for the last few weeks, so it's probably from a time before that. But at the moment, I suppose the risk of spread is low. The department briefed everybody this morning, and they're looking for vigilance, really. Now, clinical signs can be typical like this. They can show lameness. It can be just a high temperature, or it can be none at all. So it is. It's very easily confused with another disease, or indeed mightn't show any signs at all. But if you do see any signs, it's advisable to report them in any case. So I suppose just get on to back to my script here on medicines. So there was a new EU regulation 2019-6, which was passed in the EU in 2019, and that replaced the previous one of 2005 that was implemented in 2007 here, and that was known as the Animal Remedies legislation. The 2019 one was implemented in 2022, but there were some delays due to political pressure on certain issues. And the last of it has been finally implemented just last December. Now, it covers a huge area of medicines, from licensing to authorizations, wholesale, retail, prescribing, and everything. But I'm just going to concentrate on the two relevant bits to farmers and vets, that are as prescribing and retail. So there's 4 broad categories of medicines. LM stands for licensed merchant, so that's over the counter. And that's what you'd normally buy over the counter in any farm store or co-op, or indeed in many veterinary practices. Doesn't require any prescription. All you have to do is adhere to the withdrawal periods. A prescription-only medicine, or POM, is a medicine that requires a prescription. A prescription-only medicine exempt, or POME, applies to certain vaccines, and I'll go through these in more detail in a minute. And VPO is veterinary practitioner only, and these can only be administered to an animal by a vet, so it can't be handed out even with a prescription. So we'll start with VPO. And this covers dangerous drugs, sedatives, drugs that are used for euthanasia, or drugs that are extremely harmful to humans, such as Micotil or Milbutil. And for obvious reasons, these are not allowed to be handled by the public. because they are quite dangerous. POME is certain vaccines. Common one would be IBR vaccine, and these need professional advice at time of retail. So a vet can supply these to their own clients, or any farmer can buy them from a pharmacist, and they don't require a prescription, but those are the only two channels available for retail. Your prescription-only medicines then are typically your antibiotics, your anti-inflammatories, some vaccines, steroids and things like that. And you'll be fairly familiar with these, so you would get a prescription for a vet for these, and in many cases you'll be getting them at time of a visit to a vet or after a consultation with a vet. So the ones that change the most then are the LMs or the licensed merchant. And these were up to now over the counter, but the antiparasitics were prescription only from 2007, except Ireland had a derogation from this because for a number of reasons, but one of the main one was that there was no evidence of any resistance to wormers in Ireland. Now that had changed, and the HPRA decided back in 2018 that they could no longer apply for this derogation. So just what's new in this regulation from the last one? So the last one in 2007 was primarily concerned with withdrawal periods and making sure the residues weren't found in meat or milk. And that was very successful, and it's widely accepted that we don't have a residue problem now that we would have had going back 25 years ago. This one is more concerned about antimicrobial resistance, and that this graph here on the left predicts that by 2050 that AMR, or antimicrobial resistance, will kill more people in Europe than cancer. So 10 million from AMR and 8.2 million from cancer. And we can see this already. You can see old people going to hospital, pick up a hospital infection, and then they die. You know what I mean? So that's happening already. But if it gets bad enough, you couldn't go in to get your hip replaced or your knee replaced because you'd be afraid the antibiotics wouldn't work if an infection started. So that's the rationale behind the regulation. The main changes are, I suppose, from a day-to-day, is a prescription for POMs, not including the antiparasitics, is brought back to 5 days. That used to be 12 months. And there's no prophylaxis allowed, and I'll explain that in a second, and limited metaphylaxis. And then the antibiotics are categorized. So prophylaxis is prophylaxis is essentially giving an antibiotic to an animal that's not sick in case they get sick, right? So a typical one would be giving scourhal to all lambs at birth. Another example would be using antibiotics on all your cows that drying off, whether they had mastitis or not. And there's a couple of more examples, like giving animals antibiotics after buying them in case they got pneumonia, for example. Metaphylaxis is slightly different. So if you had a pen of cattle that 3 or 4 of them were sick, you might treat the entire pen because you would be afraid that they'd all get it. So that's metaphylaxis. It's different than prophylaxis. And the other thing that's new is that the department are now collecting all prescription data from vets through the National Veterinary Prescribing Service. So all prescriptions have to be online and they have to be shared with the department. So they have full visibility of what's been prescribed to whom and what categories of drugs throughout the country. And that's been in place since January of 25. So that's all, it's just a year old now, or maybe a year and 2 weeks. Yeah, so prophylaxis, as I said, is giving an antibiotic in case something would get sick. So blanket dry cow therapy is the most obvious example. Using scourhal in lambs is CTC powder to all calves you buy in would be another one. Some people inject all lambs or used to inject all lambs at birth in case they got joint ill. And some people use antibiotic spray on navels, for example, instead of disinfectant. So that's all examples of prophylaxis, and that's not allowed anymore. Get down to the antibiotic categories then. So the people that devise these up, there's a couple of different bodies, but basically they're categorized A, B, C, and D. And if we start at the bottom, category D are your typically first line of treatment antibiotics, so your penicillins, your oxytets, your sulfonamides, things that people would have used for simple treatments. maybe had a bottle of it at home in case they had a calf with navel in or something like that. Category C then are designed for, under this new legislation, as second line treatment, and they would include the likes of Singalox and Newflor and things like that. Category B then come under what is this category on the picture here, which is called the highest priority critically important antibiotics, and they're critically important for humans now, not for animals. So they would typically contain the fluoroquinolones, which a lot of people would know as Marbicil or Baytril. They would include in some people's books, they would include macrolides, which would be Draxin, Tylosin, that sort of thing, and in other categories they would be in category 2, and third and fourth generation cephalosporins, which would be Cobactin or some of the non-milk withdrawal antibiotics. And under this guidance from the department, these can't be used as first line treatments, and they can only be used where nothing else is suitable. So they're advising that you'd have culture and sensitivity done before you'd use them. Now there is a proviso there for a vet to make a decision in an emergency to use these products to save an animal's life, but essentially they're not available for farmers to purchase or use themselves under the current legislation. And the category A ones then are gone completely. So no, they weren't widely used in veterinary, but they've been retained, taken off the market for vets, and retained for humans. So when it comes to the antiparasitics, so the dosing products, wormers, flucicides, things like that, they can still be sold in all the outlets that they were sold up to now, except they require a prescription. Now, for your ordinary farm vet to give a prescription, he either has to see the animals that he's going to prescribe for, or because he visits, or he or she visits that farm all the time, would be able to make what's called other proper assessment. So if a farmer came in and said, I have calves and one of them has navel ill, and you talk to the farmer and you say, fair enough, that's navel ill, it's perfectly fine for that vet to prescribe a bottle of something for that disease. If I was never on the farm before, it's not allowed for a vet to do that because a CPPR doesn't exist. And a CPPR stands for a client practice patient relationship. So a vet can prescribe for his own clients for things without seeing animals, as he always did, or she always did, provided he's satisfied from the consultation or what's called the other proper assessment in the legislation. Now, the Minister has brought in a proper assessment protocol, which is slightly different, that a co-op or a merchant can have a vet that can prescribe where a CPPR doesn't exist. So they can have a vet on site or available to them that will prescribe following the proper assessment protocol being filled out. But I suppose the trick in this is that once it's prescribed, then that CPPR is established, and that vet then has duties of care for after hours cover and all the rest of it. So we don't know the impact of this yet. It's quite controversial, and as we said, it's only in place since December, so we don't really know how that's going to pan out at all. So that's all I have on that, and I'll be happy when you're finished grilling Damien on the TV. I'll be happy to take any questions that are there on that. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks for that, Conor. So we're going to go through a few questions here now. There's a good few questions in here. There's one here just to start you off there. John has the rest of them. What's the department's plan there, Damien, to control wild deer? They're causing a lot of bother on farms in relation to knocking fences, wires, spreading TB, etc. So just to start off there with yourself, Damien, that's a prominent question that has come in there 2 times.
Yeah, the issue of deer, that's been thorny for a while, and the previous minister established a deer management strategy group with the minister and the Department of Housing in 2022. That strategy has been developed, The big thing in that has been the establishment of a control of a national deer program manager, and that's Farm Relief Services in Roscrea that won that tender, and they've established 15 deer management units around the country. Now, the function of these deer management units is essentially to match hunters with people that need deer hunted, and these are operating locally, and I suggest that you contact those in the first instance. There's a wider thing here about encouraging more hunting, and also creating outlets for venison. Like one of the problems that led to this surge in deer was that during COVID, the demand for venison fell off a cliff, and we really need that demand to that demand to kind of encourage the hunters to get out there and hunt them. Now, the other thing that will also that's under consideration at the moment, but it's not finalized as some kind of an incentive for the hunting of say young females in particular, the breeding stock, so as to reduce the number of young stock being produced. But like this is quite a complex issue, and like there's as part of the process of developing the strategy, there was a consultation, and 1,500 people responded to that consultation. And the main reasons for dealing with deer as a result of that was their impact on biodiversity and forestry. Um, damage to fences and grazing was also identified. TB was quite far down that list. But like this is an issue. This is a societal issue more than specific to farmers, and it needs a pretty it needs a multifaceted response.
Thanks, Damien. There's a few more questions there. Um, will a 30-day pre-movement TB test be required for suckler-bred cows or suckler-bred springing heifers as well as dairy cows?
The short answer for that is no. Not but animals will be required. Those animals will be moving on a 6 month. Those animals, the cows will need to be moving on a 6 month test. If they're out of the 6 month test, they will need a 30-day test. Um, the younger suckler females, that doesn't apply to them.
Thanks, Damien. Why has there been a surge in TB in the last few years? Probably the last 5 years.
Um, I think, as I would have said there earlier on, that the background level of TB in the system has increased since quotas were abolished in 2015. TB was at an all-time low in 2016. I think we had about 17,000 reactors, and herd incidence was around 3.5. As after quota abolition, herd sizes got larger. There was a lot of movement of cattle, and to be quite honest with you, there was a complacency across the industry about TB, and people, I think, might have felt it wasn't around anymore, but it was around. And TB is one of those diseases, like it's like a spring. You need to keep it pressed down, and if you take the pressure off it, it'll bounce back up at you. And it had an opportunity to bounce back up as its herd size increased. And the other thing is that as herds have gotten bigger, this issue of residual infection has assumed a far greater importance than it had 20 or 30 years ago. And this is something that we in the action plan that we're going out of our way to tackle, because it hasn't been it needs to be tackled now, because the disease, the epidemiology of the disease has changed over the last 30 years.
And Damien, another question that came in and it just follows on to a point that you mentioned there about the increase in herd size. But does herd size have any effect on the incidence of TB? Do you see anything that
Oh
TB
yes,
anymore?
it is related. Herd size look, herd size is a risk factor for every disease. Even in people. If you put a whole lot of people into a confined space versus a small number of people in the same space, disease will spread much more rapidly where you have a lot of susceptible hosts, whether they're people or whether they're animals. So herd size is a known risk factor for every disease, including TB, every infectious disease now.
And another question there, Damien. Do you know what is the assumed level of latent infection in the national herd?
I don't. That's a very difficult question to answer because um, the thing about latency is we can model it and we can guesstimate it. But like what I can tell you is that the disease, the skin test carried out to a very high standard is leaving 2 out of every 10 infected cattle behind it. When we repeated tests, we're reducing that probability all the time, and that's why we need the two clear tests before a de-restriction can be removed. Um, like that that's that's a very difficult question to answer, and you're probably looking at fairly complex epidemiological or mathematical and statistical models to answer it. But it's a very good question, I have to say.
Thanks, Damien. That's nearly all the questions there now that I can see there. There's the questions here for Conor as well. Uh, Now, perhaps, Damien, you might have an opinion on it as well. Um, but the question is asked, do the vets online agree that animals being detected in the factory is a huge problem? Particularly, a lot of animals are sold through marts. This is very worrying and needs to be addressed. So I suppose that's more TB related question again for Damien. The marts, I suppose there is a lot of animals going through marts. Possibly, Damien, a risk
Yeah.
as well.
Um, like what I'm more concerned about is long-term residency. And a day in a mart isn't a long-term residency. And it's when animals are nose to nose over a series of weeks and months, even years, that you get the conditions for the spread of TB. Moving animals through a mart on a day, um, like it's probably got implications for viral diseases more so than TB. Um, I'm I I I I think there's bigger fish to fry now than that one.
Thanks, Damien. Um, that's nearly all there now on TB. Thanks very much. Conor, there's some questions here on blue tongue and on the medicines dosing animals for fluke and worms. There's a question here. Can you confirm, is the Northern Ireland market now closed to store cattle from the Republic of Ireland as a result of the blue tongue outbreak? So that would be a question, I suppose, related to exports of cattle.
Yeah, I wouldn't be 100%. There's a difference between slaughter, cattle going destined for slaughter, and breeding animals anyway. Now, Damien probably knows better how that's going to pan out. So I suppose different countries have different export certification requirements, and European countries would be fairly standardized, but third countries would be different. And I'd just pass that back to Damien. He might know about the north. Now, I know there's a difference between breeding animals and animals for slaughter.
Yeah. Um, it's animals going for direct slaughter. There isn't an issue. I'm nearly sure that that is correct. In that store animals or animals that are going to be kept in the north, there is an issue with that. Um, Animals going for direct slaughter, there's there's no problem with that.
Hmm. Be up to the UK government to decide what they'll take, you see.
Yeah,
and
Well,
they mightn't have decided that yet, that, and it could change. So it'll probably be something that'll be hammered out over the next week or so. I'd say it mightn't be that clear, set in stone yet.
And thanks. And Conor, there's a question here related to the prescription medicine.
Hmm.
Uh, do you have to have a prescription from your vet beforehand, and then go and buy it in your local co-op? So I suppose,
You can buy it from any number of outlets the same as you could beforehand. So you can buy your dosing from your co-op or your farm store or your veterinary practice as you always did, depending on where you chose to do so. But yeah, you will require a prescription now. So you have two choices. You can get a prescription from your own vet, or you can get a prescription if the co-op or farm store has a vet under this proper assessment protocol that will facilitate that, then you can do it that way as well. So there's two ways of doing it.
thanks, Conor. There's another question here about
yeah, I
dose that was
just,
purchased. Sorry there,
if I could just
Damien Viewpoint.
confirm that only on the Northern Ireland question, only moves direct for slaughter are allowed at the moment, as of today. But as Conor said, this is an evolving situation.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be day by day now, and see how things pan out that way, and what the spread will be. Hopefully, there won't be any. And we understand that you're very much trying to control this as you go, and it's a new area, and it's going to pose a significant challenge for all. And I think everyone acknowledges that, and we acknowledge that, and farmers acknowledge that too. Um, as back maybe Conor, was a question there about medicines purchased before the 1st of December, um, before the legislation came in. Can farmers still use that legally, or
As
do
far
they
as I
have
know,
to?
they can, yes. So they can, as long as it's in date and it's for the right species and to follow all the other guidelines. As far as I know, if they've purchased before the whatever date it came in, the 1st of December, then that can be used up. I don't see any issue with that. Now, I'd say if it was going on for a few years and it was going out of date, there might be an issue with it. But if you
An
have a
issue with board
if you
via certification.
well, if you have product in your medicine cabinet on a board BIA inspection or indeed a department inspection, you have to show where it came from. And if it came from a licensed merchant before the 1st of December, then it was purchased legally and then therefore should be sound, as long as it's in date and you know what I mean, stored correctly, it'll be fine. Yeah.
And Conor, there's just a question here. Is there a guideline maybe on charges? Are vets obviously going to charge for their time and for their work? And is
I'm
there
sure they
any
will, but there'll be certainly
template
no
or
guidelines. So yeah, I'm sure they will, but there'll be certainly no guidelines. So there is, I'm sure each individual mart or co-op store or licensed merchant, if they have one of these vets employed, will have some sort of a charge. And I'm sure that there are, I'm sure vets, if they have to do a lot of this work, will probably have a charge for it. But then again, we'll say once it opens up again, there's a parasite control TASA there that's available. Was available last year, and as far as I know, it's going to be available next year. You know, that could be utilised maybe where the vet is paid for by Animal Health Ireland to give parasite advice. So there's ways around all that as well.
would you say, Conor, that it'd be best practice for every farmer, maybe to go in and get a plan done with their vet for a number of months at a time, or things like
Yeah, well, a
that?
prescription, I suppose, if you prescribe something today, it's only valid for 6 months. And the danger, I suppose, of going in and getting trying to get this big plan is you end up with a prescription a mile long that maybe half the stuff you don't need at all. So I suppose people that always work with their vets will be able to do that from, they might have a herd health plan in place or they might be updating it at regular intervals. But it would seem foolish to me for people to go and use, we'll say, get a full 6 months of a prescription and try to fill that and have medicine stores full of stuff that they mightn't want. I think all the indications have shown over the last decade that probably 2/3 of what's being used doesn't need to be used. When we did in 23, when the last parasite control thing was 80% of the dung samples taken showed there was no need to use anything at all. So there's a lot of dosing goes on that's not needed, and there's a few farms and at certain times of year where there isn't enough dosing done at certain times. So I think that it's best practice to try and work out when the right time to dose is and use only what's necessary. And you might have to give €3 or €4 or €6 per item extra for a prescription fee in your LM. But if you only use half the stuff, you still end up with a lot more money in your pocket. And I think that's the aim of it, is to use less and use it wisely.
It's good advice, Conor. Keep people going as they were and obtain prescriptions as they need it to avoid waste. Good practical advice. Thanks very much. And that's all the questions that we have here. James, have you any closing remarks or anything to
That's it,
add?
John. Thanks very much for those questions. No, we have them all covered there. I just looked through them there, Conor, or John, you have them all gone through. Just to say thanks very much to Damien Barrett and Conor Geraghty for coming on this evening. Very informative session, two very topical issues at the moment. And on the blue tongue, please God, now it won't spread, and that's all we can hope for. It's an evolving situation, so it will be in the media, and we'll see how over the next couple of weeks, Conor, Damien, there'll probably be more feedback on it. There's a lot up in the air at the minute with the blue tongue, so wouldn't you agree on that, yeah? Yeah. So we'll have to see how that goes. So please God, there's no spread on it. So we'll leave it at that this evening. And I'd like to thank the two lads there, Conor and Damien, and thanks yourself, John, for doing the questions. And we'll leave it at and thanks for everybody who attended it. Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks.
Thanks now. Good night.
Good night.